And, others like, no, this is the truth. I heard it from a friend of mine who saw it firsthand from a friend of theirs.
The fish was this big. Welcome back to another episode of The Table of Content. I am Albert Saenz, joined again with my wonderful co-host, Michael Steele. Michael Steele, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
It's hard, isn't it, to resist, to want to say, being in Mr. Rogers' hometown, to not want to just always say, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
This is our corner of the world, right? This is, yeah.
They've got that one sign over the bridge when you're going through the highway, beautiful day in the neighborhood. And it's always just that reminder, Mr. Rogers walked around here somewhere.
That's right.
Actually, side note, they've been trying to sell some of his excess, like a retreat house or his vacation house. And it's still there waiting to be sold, but I'm thinking that'd be a great place to buy.
Wouldn't it?
To be like, Mr. Rogers vacationed here in this house or lived in this house. Maybe a little bit of it, his essence, so just sort of want to pull on a sweater and throw my shoes. And,
Right. He had such a calming presence, and he had just such a beautiful view of life and the dignity of the human person. And, who wouldn't want to be associated with that?
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't want to be associated with Mr. Rogers, maybe you need to start over.
There you go. Right. Yes. Let's get back to basics.
Right. Let's come back to the neighborhood and try again.
Yeah. The essential goodness of every single human person. Right. Yeah.
Well, speaking of, the goodness of the human person, let's get into today's episode.
Sure.
And so what we're doing here is we're starting on a 5-episode run of a series written for WB Audio Theater by Joe Potts, right? And Joe Potts has sort of been a veteran to audio theater. A lot of his writings have made their way into our recordings, and he's also acted for us. But another great series from Joe Potts, the Stories from the Tall Tales Club. And, we're dealing with a gathering of people who come together, and they tell their tales, and they sort of mock each other on whether it's an outlandish lie or if it has some merit to it. And we've got a host of characters that we're introduced to out the gate. There's Big Billy. There's
Major Reuben, right?
Major Reuben, and then Lady Jane, the classic sort of Southern Belle character, hailing from North Carolina. Joe's actually in it as the narrator. So he sort of, he comes in as the narrator.
Okay.
So he gets to make his own appearance. Then you have Colonel Crinkle, just a good host of people. And throughout the series, as we continue to talk about it, we'll introduce some other characters that come along. What was your first initial reaction to to episode 1 of the Stories from the Tall Tales Club?
Sure. Well, I like the idea of the Tall Tales Club because it got me thinking about the origin of tall tales in American culture and how when people wanted to entertain themselves, this is, pre-internet, pre-YouTube era, back in the pioneer days, they would sit around the campfire in the evenings.
On the Oregon Trail?
Right, on the Oregon Trail. And what would they do? They would try to one-up each other on the most outlandish tales that they could come up with. And figures like Paul Bunyan or Mike Fink or Pecos Bill emerged from these fireside gatherings. And you can imagine the dynamic there in front of the campfire of people kind of heckling each other, like, yeah, right. And, others like, no, this is the truth. I heard it from a friend of mine who saw it firsthand from a friend of theirs.
The fish was this big.
Right. You've heard that story, right? Grandpa's telling the fish story, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So the kids say, the next time he tells a story, we're going to have to tie his wrists together. So the next time he tells a story, his wrists are tied, and he's like, well, I once caught a fish, and its eyeball was this big.
That's a big fish.
So, but anyways, so I like that idea of tall tales in general as a way not only to entertain, but also to communicate a lesson about life or a moral or a caution or some to impart some kind of insight or wisdom. I was thinking even like all the great teachers throughout history use stories as a way to communicate a message.
Right? I mean, our very own Bible, full of stories and parables to help, teach about salvation, right? It wasn't just a letter of the law type of, it wasn't just an instruction manual. I mean, outright, in the strictest sense. It was full of stories. And for a long time, many of those stories were sort of passed along orally, that was tradition before writing was a norm, like, all right, well, I was told this story by my grandfather and he was told that story by his grandfather. And then, of course, the ancient writers eventually put it down to papyrus or whatever it was that they wrote on,
Right.
And so thank you, Holy Spirit, and thank you, ancient writers, for putting it down so that now we have it. But yes, I mean, I'm sure even prior to the Bible, it was all just stories. What else were they going to do? Like you said, there was no YouTube.
Right. Yeah. You think of Aesop's fables or the Plato's allegory of the cave or, even some of the writings of Buddha, that idea of like, here's an experience that I've had and I want to share it. But in order to make it enjoyable, I'm going to put it in a story form. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, let's jump into the first story here, right? So what we have Stories from the Tall Tales Club, episode 1, and this is the time elephant. And brilliant deduction would let the listener know then there's something about a time travel and something about
Pachyderm.
a pachyderm. Now, as always, if you have not listened to the story, stop, pause here, go to either our website, weareonebodyaudiotheater.org, go to our YouTube channel for We Are One Body Audio Theater, or one of our podcast stations, and listen to episode 1 from Stories from the Tall Tales Club, The Time Elephant. So listen to the story and then come back so then you could hear Michael and I hash it out.
Spoilers ahead.
Spoilers ahead. So now it's on you. So anyways, why don't you open it up, Michael?
Great. So we have the story of the time elephant. So, well, and to couch it, it's this group of people, these friends who belong to this tall tale club, which is kind of cool. And they're sitting around, and Major Reuben, also known as Big Billy, starts to share a story, an experience that he had of encountering a Punjabi who had or claimed to have an elephant that could travel in time, travel through time. And he would charge exorbitant amounts of money for his clients to climb on the elephant and have an experience of time travel. And so he immediately gets some kickback from all the other friends of his at the table. And they're like, yeah, right, for sure. Here's another one, right? And they're rolling their eyes.
Sure. And Reuben is, as you come to know in the stories, like Reuben is sort of the really sort of whopper of a storyteller, right? They all kind of have big stories, but Reuben really sort of pushes the limits for everyone in the club, especially for Beaumont, who really seems to be just at his wit's end every time Reuben tries to continue on with the story.
Right. The sarcastic remarks of Beaumont underneath his breath and, peppered throughout the story really, make me chuckle.
But I think one of the first things that we come up against really is the, moving past the story element is we have Reuben who comes in and starts to tell his, he starts to weave his tale. And what we really see first off is we see Reuben, at least in the way he tells the story, is that he was noticing Kapoor being potentially a little rough on the elephant, right? And the elephant is aptly named Baby, and we think, according to the story, because it was found as a baby, so now just the elephant is named Baby.
Yeah.
So we get this first little insight, along the tail end of the story that not only is he potentially a big storyteller, but that somewhere inside, right, that he is concerned for the animal's well-being, right? And that's going to come into play as we continue through the story. But he decides to figure out what's going on with Kapoor. He's been spying, seeing the elephant sort of disappear and then return. And he finally says, all right, let's see what this is about.
Right. Yeah, and he starts to hear stories of the people who had traveled on the elephant. This one young lady who asked to be taken somewhere beautiful, and she thought she was taken to like the Swiss Alps, this field of flowers. And so he's starting to gather sort of secondhand evidence before he gets the courage or works up the courage to actually pay the exorbitant fee and have the experience for himself. But right, he does notice that Kapoor is pushing the elephant beyond its what he perceives as its comfort and its capacity, really.
So we have Reuben, who then makes his decision and says, "Okay, let's see what this is really about." Now, along the way, he's very adamant with Kapoor to be nice to the elephant, right? Like, you're not going to mistreat this elephant. Like, you're going to be nice,
right?
And he keeps having to press that along the way, and because I think human weakness, human brokenness, whatever you would want to say, right? It's very easy for us to say something, right? Especially to a crowd of people, right? Well, to my fellow friends, I am a charitable force for animals. I am a charitable force for the homeless. I am a charitable force for all things right.
Right.
It's easy to say it, right? But then to actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
And Reuben, at least from his story, he actually, he talks the talk and walks the walk. He, as he's flying, he's walking as he's flying on the elephant.
Right. Through time,
but making sure that he's like, stop, you're mistreating the elephant.
Right.
So I think that's a good observation, right? Like, okay, fine. You want to stand for something good. Make sure that you are actually willing to do the good thing yourself.
Right. Yeah, that you're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. You're following through, right? Right. And there's that, like you were saying, without getting too much into detail or peeling off too many layers, but when he does approach Kapoor offers to take him for free because he knows Reuben's reputation. And if Reuben has a positive experience, that would enhance his business, right?
Right.
Create a buzz, get the word out about his time-traveling elephant. But he continues to mistreat the elephant, though, right? Or tries to throughout their journey. And Reuben is continually stopping him at the last moment.
Right. Or at least trying, because, Kapoor tries to reassure Reuben that it's okay, that it's fine, And again, another sort of takeaway from, history of the world. We've seen people who have tried to justify their actions. Right? We've tried to say, no, this is okay. It's for the good of the world. It's for the good of the people. It's for the good of whatever the group, the situation, the organization. But history is filled with these types of people who think they're doing something good, but really they're doing something bad to get there. And it doesn't, say the ends, don't justify the means.
Right. Yes. Right. And you see the sort of the character arch of Kapoor is along those lines. We hear that he adopted this elephant from when she was a baby. He has some kind of sense of entitlement or ownership, or, I cared for the elephant from when she was really young. So you can tell he's trying to justify his whole method of mistreating her by these other things that he's done, right? And the bottom line is you can't use, people for a means, or as a means. You can't use people as a means, or you have to treat them as an ends in themselves. And the whole fact that he's trying to capitalize on his elephant's talent for time travel, I feel like is also problematic, and charging exorbitant fees. It feels almost like he's exploiting.
Right. Right, exactly. And we have plenty of examples of people being exploited, in the worst sort of ways, and some not completely evil, but exploitation is something that the world is very familiar with and has been as far as history kind of goes.
Mm-hmm.
Like taking someone that can potentially do something interesting and, okay, how can we use that to our gain, right? Versus how can we use that for good, right? And we get it. We do get it confused, right? We get entertainment, personal passions. Like we want to say, oh well, those are all good things, right? We want to say, how can I satisfy your desires? What is that going to take? And so then, well, if I exploit this person or this thing, then I can satisfy your desires. And the thing is, right, some of these desires aren't even good in themselves, right? So we lead into a lot of these really heavily sort of immoral and dark places of the world, where things are happening and people are being just really just mistreated, but people justify it. Oh, but it's okay because it's a good thing. It's like, well, one, what you're doing is wrong, but two, the thing isn't even that good, or it's just completely wrong.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's such a thing as doing a good thing for the bad reasons, or, but there's also doing bad things for bad reasons.
Yeah, we have a lot of that.
Right. Exactly. But and at the very, I guess, best is his relationship with his elephant is utilitarian. Right? It's not, like you were saying, it's not focused on the value of the elephant for the elephant's sake. It's the value of the elephant in as much as the elephant can make me money, right? There's no sense of wonder in the fact that the elephant can travel in time at all. Like, that's amazing, right?
There may have been in the beginning. Obviously, I mean, I don't know how you would not sort of be in wonder of time travel just in itself, but now I've got an elephant that can time travel. He must have been dumbfounded right in the beginning, but then the brain started to work towards, maybe I can get something out of this.
Right.
And then the path changes.
Right. As you were talking, I was just thinking over the weekend, we were camping with some friends, and they were talking about the whole sort of dog show culture, and how they've been to dog shows where the competition is so high and the mindset is so on perfection and winning the prize money that the dogs are really, in one sense, just they aren't mistreated, but their lives are basically, they're in their kennel and then they're shown. And then they're back in their kennel again because they don't want any flaws or anything. And they were just commenting how they've been to many of these dog shows where they walk by and the dogs just seem miserable because they're just in their kennels waiting to be shown. And that's I think that example of the business model winning out over the amazing creature that we have in front of us, right? Similarly with the elephant and time travel.
But, I bet, if we could ask God about any of his creations, whether it be the human creation, animal creation, nature, the world. And if you asked him, I bet there's a really, really good chance that he would say, I did not create any of this for the sake of being exploited. I didn't create any of this to be used in an ill manner. I created all of this to be at the disposal of man, hence, from Genesis, right? You're going to have basically dominion over everything. And okay, great. But he didn't say, you're going to have dominion over everything. Now use it for your own personal gain in the worst ways possible.
Right. Yeah. And that, I feel, is all a reflection, going back to the Genesis story, of the fall of man. Because before the fall, man, had dominion over the animals, but in a way that was in balance, right? That respected the dignity of every creature as a creature of God, right? And something emanating from God's goodness, his beauty, his truth, and somehow a reflection of that goodness, beauty, and truth, right? And then it's when Adam and Eve fell, they introduce this twistedness in their relationship with God that we all kind of carry with ourselves throughout the generations, that this disorder is introduced into all of creation, not just within ourselves, but also within how we relate to the creatures of the world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? You think that someone who mistreats an animal, it's sad on behalf of the animal, but it's also sad on behalf of the person because they're not living up to what they're supposed to be doing, right? And I feel like Kapoor is kind of a pitiable person in that sense. We feel injustice, we feel anger, there's something not quite right about him, but we also feel sort of that pity for him, that he's like, yeah, he's not really being fully human, right? In that sense, right?
And again, I mean, we want to try to have mercy and understanding and say, well, he's trying to make a living, but again, at what cost? And not just to the animal, but like you said, sort of to the person themselves, right? Like what is Kapoor been doing to himself over these years in the way that he has created a business out of basically mistreating the elephant, mistreating baby, and it's like, you could have a really good life, and so yes, it's a mix of you pity the person, you want to be a little angry with the person, and you just want sort of the best outcome. You're like, well, what's the best thing here, that can happen?
Mm-hmm.
And again, being redundant, but I think we see a lot of those types of instances in the world today. You're like, or from history, you're like, why did the person do that? That's really sad. Also, it's really upsetting. Also, I don't even understand, what were they thinking?
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, as you said, we go back to the fall. Everything shifted from there, and the way that the perfect balance, the perfect dominion, went into a corrupted, broken dominion. And we have to sort of live with that to the best of our abilities. But it's hard.
Right. It is. Right. And then in the end, we see how in the story, Kapoor gets his sort of just desserts. And I feel like with every story that's well told, there's that tying of the knot and then the untying of the knot, that like building of the story arch and or story arc. You reach that moment, that pivotal moment where it's like, I just like, where's this going? And then something happens, and then you're like, okay, there's that sense of justice, conclusion, and sometimes we're left wondering with more questions than we have answers. But I feel like that's also the sign of a good storyteller as well. If they leave us thinking about things, pondering about things, And then we have Kapoor's grandson introduced as well as sort of antithesis to Kapoor.
Right, because he does seem sort of like the innocent bystander. He sort of just helps his grandfather, but he doesn't seem completely sort of entangled in the way that Kapoor is into just the mistreatment of baby and trying to make money. He's just helping his grandfather. Because then at the end of the story, so basically, spoiler, we don't know what happens to Kapoor. Baby ends up sort of having a moment to wrap up Kapoor in her trunk and then disappears.
What a dramatic moment.
And then returns without Kapoor. Right. All we know is that there was some snow on baby's back and no Kapoor. So Reuben eventually says, well, because he sort of gets questioned a little bit back at the club by Colonel Crinkle and says, well, did you try to help Kapoor? And it's like, well, I could do. There was only something I could do. All I could do was go up to the grandson and say, keep an eye out and see if he comes back. And the grandson says that he'll keep an eye out if he comes back. And there's this unknown, like, did Kapoor ever get back? Did baby come back? Did baby and Kapoor make amends? Did they come to an understanding and were they friendly again?
Right.
Did they, we just don't know. We could speculate on 1,000 different endings here.
Right.
But it is sort of a interesting cliffhanger.
Right. And in every story, there's that suspension of disbelief. And I like how this story starts out with a time-traveling elephant and her master, right? So we're left with like, well, where's the origin story of baby? I mean, it's hinted at, but we're not really given like the actual story itself. And why does she have time-traveling abilities herself? And then at the very end, she disappears with Kapoor, comes back with snow, and then she disappears again. And we're left like we're not given the answers,
right?
Which I think makes for great storytelling. Maybe
there will be a sequel to episode 1, and we'll find out. Kapoor's returned.
That's right. Right, baby's returned.
Baby's returned. Kapoor's back.
That's right.
So, and we sort of round out the story there. And of course, there's members from the club that just cannot handle Big Billy's story. And they say that Beaumont was really sort of just about to completely sort of lose it, which I find entertaining. I was envisioning, this man just completely sort of like doubled over, like about to explode. And of course, Lady Jane also not too sure about it.
He references Tinkerbell, maybe fairy dust, maybe Tinkerbell. There's snow on the elephant, right?
There's a lot of good zingers in there. So we kind of come to the end of the story, and the narrator sort of poses some questions, right, about mercy and kindness, and making reference to what is it that we're called to as humans, right, and what is the greater impact of mercy and kindness, right? If you look at Proverbs, in Proverbs 11, it says, kindly people benefit themselves, but the merciless harm themselves. And I think what we witnessed here was Kapoor being merciless, and he harmed himself in the end. I mean, he was already sort of destroying his interior self, right? Because we sometimes don't recognize that our interior lives can be destroyed well before our physical is destroyed.
Right.
So Kapoor was, he was focused on whatever it took, whatever he had to do to get money.
Right.
So he mistreated baby.
Yeah.
And he was being merciless about it. No matter, even when Reuben was interjected that, no, it's fine. It's okay. And whack, and It's like, hey, stop it. No, it's okay. Whack, and so what happens? Baby's like, well, I've had enough. So we're going away now, and I'm going to take you far away. We don't know where they went. And so it came back to him. But what if Kapoor had never tried to take advantage of baby from a financial standpoint? What if he had just had a relationship been like, this is a very precious creation, a miracle of God,
Right.
and I'm just going to care for baby. I'm going to take, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to try to make money off of baby. Like, mercy and kindness would have been a completely different outcome.
Right. And there's that moment in the story where they go and they hear Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, right? And when I read that, I had this thought, if you had a time-traveling elephant, think of the good on a grander scale that you could do rather than just making a buck. If you had all of history's knowledge up to the present moment and you could go back in time, not to say, and there's no end to stories like that where people travel in time, they alter and it seems like nowadays there's this whole fixation with like multiple multiverses and different timelines and, what ifs would happen if, just one instant, one person's decision was, veered off course or they chose X rather than, B. As you were talking, I was just thinking about those kind of things as well.
Well, I mean, this opens up a potential metaphysical, philosophical type of conversation, but I'm just going to ask the outright question. Yes, what good could be done, but hasn't God already let that past happen?
Right. Yes.
So who are we to venture in and saying, I can do good with all of my current knowledge, I can go back and do good? It's like, well, God already had that run. Like,
right.
Why should we go back and interfere? Again, good intentions, but suddenly we get into God's domain and we're like, I don't think I'm supposed to be playing here. I think... I think
that's right.
It's to go and observe. That's one thing, right? But to go back and say I can do good, it's like it's done.
Yeah,
it's done.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't. There's nowhere that says in Scripture, and then the time travel begun for the sake of humanity.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Given human condition, God has already created the best possible outcome out of all the, whatever that's called, future possible contingents or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. And that's true. Right. The very fact that we have a savior, Jesus Christ, that's amazing. And that he became one of us and died for us and rose again and asked us to be part of his life. That is amazing.
Well, I think that's a great example. I think that's the best example here, right? For Christian salvation to be an actual tangible thing, Christ had to go through his passion and die. You're like, oh, I can time travel. I can go back and save Christ from the passion.
Yeah.
It's like, really good intentions, but if that doesn't happen, then salvation doesn't come full circle. Like we don't have the salvation as we know it. The gates of heaven don't get opened up. Like he has to.
Yes.
Right? Like we can't go back and disrupt that and say, I'm gonna save Jesus. It's like,
yeah.
You can't. You can't. You mustn't.
Right.
Or you've destroyed, the path of salvation. So that's probably the best case for like, don't go back in time travel because you're going to wreck something. You're going to mess it up.
Right. Because it's just, in essence, it's misguided human arrogance again, like Peter, like, no, wait, God forbid something happened. And Jesus is like, get away from me, Satan.
Get behind me, Satan.
Get behind me, Satan. Right. Again, trying to be the savior of the savior. No, that's not our place. Our place is to be saved, right? It's to recognize, I'm the creature here. And the fallen creature at that, and you're my savior. That's the proper relationship, and the more we kind of grasp that, the more he can do with us, like the more he can allow the salvation that he brings to find its fulfillment in us. Yeah.
Right. And then that's the beginning, right? That's then how we that's how we don't have a story like Kippur. We don't have a man like Kippur, right? We let Christ in through the salvation that took place in history through Christ's act, which happened just over 2,000 years ago.
Right.
So we didn't mess with history. That happened. Salvation moved forward, and we accept Christ into our life and all that he did, and we hopefully can find a way to not end up being a Kippur.
Right. Yeah. And temptation will always be there.
Right.
And concupiscence is always there. But then that's our participation in the salvation that Christ offers us, that we may have temptations to monetize or to exploit or things like that. But then as long as we're trying to do the right thing, God will help us with that. And he's always giving us his light. And so I'll remember that the next time I come into contact with a time-traveling elephant.
Yeah, take care of that elephant.
That's right.
Lest you be scooped up and be taken away to a snowy mountaintop. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let that be a lesson to everyone listening. Be kind to the time-traveling elephant that you stumble across, and don't try to exploit that time-traveling elephant.
I love that, right? What are the time-traveling elephants in our lives? The things that we should be in wonder and awe about versus trying to turn it into a business model. Right. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I like that.
Well, that's probably a good place for us to wrap up here, Michael, on the Stories from the Tall Tales Club, Episode 1, The Time Elephant. Again, if you didn't stop and go listen to it and you still haven't heard it and you wanted to hear the podcast first, okay, we'll let you off the hook. Go now, listen to Episode 1 of the Stories from the Tall Tales Club, The Time Elephant. Find it on our website, weareoneBodyAudiotheater.org. Go to our YouTube channel for We Are One Body Audio Theater, or find us on podcast or our Facebook channel. We're all over the place. Go listen to Stories from the Tall Tales Club, Episode 1. And Michael, always a pleasure to talk with you.
Likewise, Albert. Yeah, I look forward to our time together.
Our time travel, our time, just our time.
Our time travel together.
Well, then, until the next episode, thank you, and thank you to all the listeners. Be good. God bless you.